Hello, I'm Henry Miori. Have you ever wondered if there's just a plain old common sense approach to planning and management? I believe there is. After a 25-year career in business and industry, I've noticed that there's some very simple principles that if we use those very simple principles, we're going to be successful as we manage, motivate, and work with our people. Stay with us. I'd like to go through each one of these common sense approaches to management with you. Common sense management. After a career of 25 years in business and industry, after having worked with a consultant in over 60 major organizations, I've found that there's some very key principles. If you keep those things in mind, you're going to have a highly motivated and on-target, well-focused workforce. I'd like to take you through each one of these, just one at a time. They're short to the point, but you're going to get a picture in your mind of how to manage from a common sense approach. The first and one of the most important is what I call care and feeding of the boss. With all these years of experience, I've noticed that there's a lot of strife, a lot of conflict, a lot of struggle out there in the organizations of America, whether it's in a church, a ministry, a railroad, an oil company, a nonprofit organization, or the gas station on a corner, that the fact that you've got a boss-employee relationship by its very nature creates conflict. Now, the care and feeding of the boss idea is one that's going to help you reduce conflict. Now, think about this. Your boss is a very dominant person in your life. Whether you want to admit it or not, you spend a lot of hours working for, serving, and trying to meet the expectation of this boss. Now, how do you care and feed a boss? Here's a procedure that I've used for years. This has paid off in organization after organization. You say to your boss, develop a list of key specific responsibilities and measurable end results. What do you want me to accomplish this year? While your boss is doing that, you take a few days and write the same thing out on a sheet of paper. Then you have a meeting, whether it's over coffee, breakfast, or a meeting in either one of your offices. You sit down and you compare those lists. What you then do is you actually agree on what's to be accomplished. If you just do this alone, you're going to solve most of your problems. What I see happening out in the workplace is that people just go to work and they don't really have a specific, defined job. They don't know exactly what it is they're supposed to accomplish. People are assuming they know what they're supposed to do and go right ahead in the motion of getting things done. That isn't going to work. You've got to sit down and verbally discuss the measurable, specific things that have to be accomplished and any other kinds of things the boss wants you to do. Then record that. Write it down in specific, measurable terms. Write out specifically what these key responsibility areas are. Care and feeding of the boss. Then you don't bother your boss as long as you're on target. You report back periodically and say, boss, I'm on target. You take that one sheet of paper and say, here's where I stand against each of those measurable objectives. Your boss is covering a lot of ground. He's got a lot of people working for him, and he doesn't have time, he or she doesn't have time to constantly be sitting down and reviewing what you're supposed to be doing. But you owe it to your boss to let them know if you're off target. I've used this care and feeding of the boss concept for years. I make sure that everybody that's working for me, that we go through the process of agreeing. We actually create a performance contract. And then, because I travel so much, I'm called to so many places, I say, now, as long as you're on target, don't worry about asking me about detailed day-to-day kinds of things. But the first time you see that you're a little bit off target or you might not reach an objective, you owe it to me to let me know immediately. Employees, if you do that, that's the best care and feeding you can possibly give your boss. Now, a second concept that I cover in the book, Common Sense Management, is, let's turn that around, care and feeding of the employee. Every boss out there, you owe it to your employee to agree on what's expected. You owe it to them to coach them to come up with that agreement. So invite them to do the very same thing. Invite them to come back and say, what is it that you think you're trying to accomplish? Write it out on a sheet of paper. I'm going to write the same thing out on a sheet of paper, and let's compare our lists. Bosses, you owe it to your people to have a discussion with them and agree on what's to be done. Bosses, in terms of care and feeding of your employee, you owe it to them to give them a pat on the back every once in a while. One thing we have to realize as leaders is that people are working to satisfy their higher level needs. I've got a 12-year research project going now across all areas of industry and church and ministry kinds of work. We're surveying people in coal mines, railroads, churches. And consistently what we're seeing over this 12-year study is that people are working for recognition, self-achievement, self-actualization. They want to be involved in their work. Now, if that's what you're working for, what does it cost you, boss, to give somebody a pat on the back, to write a memo to say, Joe, really good job, in front of your sales force, to pick someone out and recognize them for a particularly job well done? If you do this, what you're going to find is you're going to have less turnover, more commitment, more loyalty, and people are going to feel good about working for you. Another principle that is important is what I call the iceberg theory. And I've often thought about the great ocean liners, and specifically the Titanic, about how an ocean liner can get in trouble, how it can run into icebergs, how things can happen because nobody's paying any attention. What the iceberg theory says, it says get everybody involved in the strategic direction of your organization. Have everybody signaling back. Anybody's liable to be the one that sees land. Any person, perhaps the most insignificant person in your organization, is going to be the one that spots the iceberg. You've got to have a system of listening and reporting back, both on opportunities and problems. That's what I call the iceberg theory. Another very important principle here is to get advice. I learned early in my career at Continental Can to get advice from other people. Almost made a mistake that might have cost me my entire job and my entire career, because I hadn't listened to a key electrician give me some advice on a major project. But once I stopped and listened, I realized we were on the wrong track. We corrected it and worked out a system that worked perfectly. But it only worked because I finally listened to advice. Now, we can find places in the Bible that it says listen for advice. Proverbs 15:22 says, without counsel, purposes are disappointed. Proverbs 19:20 says, hear counsel and receive instruction. Proverbs 20:18 says, every purpose is established by counsel. I see a major problem across our industrial America with not listening for advice, not answering people when they send in ideas. You've got to have an iceberg theory that says everybody's out on deck watching. Create a listening environment in your organization, and that's what's going to keep you out of trouble.